The screen of Shirley's phone was a blurred, neon smear through the haze of her tears. Her fingers, stiff and clumsy, hovered over the glass as she typed the confession she never thought she'd say out loud. He took my virginity last night. I'm bleeding and he's gone. She hit send, the whoosh of the message sounding like a final breath. The reply came in less than 10 seconds. Private number. A single, bone-chilling command. Stay where you are. I'm tracking the GPS now. Shirley let the phone slip into the folds of her hospital gown. The plastic chair of the clinic felt like a throne of ice against her bruised skin. Around her neck, the bandages felt like Robert's hands. Heavy, possessive, and tightening every time she tried to breathe. The air in the waiting room smelled of industrial bleach and old magazines. A scent that would forever be the smell of her undoing. I'm doing this for your own good, Shirley. Robert's voice echoed in her mind. Just 12 hours ago, he had been the man who promised her the world. The man who'd tucked a stray hair behind her ear and told her she was his perfect little porcelain doll. But porcelain was meant to be broken. He had shattered her in that cold apartment, his face a mask of calm as he watched her spirit leave her eyes. He hadn't just taken her innocence. He had taken her sense of being human. A heavy silence hung over the clinic, broken only by the low hum of the vending machine. She should be relieved he was gone, but the silence was a lie. Silence didn't mean safety. It just meant he was waiting for her to crawl back. Then, the roar of a high-performance engine cut through the quiet. Outside the glass doors, a black sedan slid into view like a shark through dark water. In a sleek, mahogany-clad boardroom overlooking the neon arteries of Seoul, the air was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and impending violence. Park Tae-seok, the ghost of Seoul, sat at the head of the table, his expression as unreadable as a frozen lake. 3 rival lieutenants sat across from him, sweating through their silk suits as they awaited his judgment on a failed shipment. Then his encrypted phone vibrated. Tae-seok didn't check personal alerts during executions, but this device was reserved for ghosts and gods. He picked it up, his thumb tracing the dragon tattoo that crept up his neck. The message on the screen was a jagged shard of glass. He took my virginity last night. I'm bleeding and he's gone. The room went deathly silent. Tae-seok's eyes narrowed, the cold calculation of the syndicate boss flickering into something sharper, darker. He didn't know a Shirley J. Williams, but he knew the scent of a predator's work. He saw the GPS coordinates blinking, a low-rent clinic on the edge of the district. Meeting's over, he said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that made the lieutenants flinch. But the shipment, Chairman. Tae-seok didn't look up as he typed his reply, his fingers steady. Wrong number, Shirley. But I'm coming anyway. He stood, the heavy legs of his chair scraping against the marble floor like a whetstone. He didn't care about the millions in lost cargo or the men trembling before him. He was drawn to the raw, unadulterated agony of that text. A cry for help sent into the void, answered by the most dangerous man alive. 10 miles away, Shirley sat beneath the flickering fluorescent hum of the clinic's waiting room. She stared at the reply, her heart hammering against her bruised ribs. I'm coming anyway. The words weren't a comfort. They were a prophecy. She felt a strange, terrifying shift in the atmosphere, as if the air itself was thickening in anticipation. She looked down at her hands, small, trembling, and stained with the memory of Robert's affection. For years, Robert had told her she was nothing without him, a ghost in her own life. Now, a real ghost was screaming through the city streets toward her. The sound reached her first, a distant, predatory growl of an engine that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Tires screeched against the asphalt outside the sliding glass doors. Shirley clutched her phone to her chest, her breath hitching in her throat. Through the glass, she saw the silhouette of a black sedan, sleek and predatory. A man stepped out, his tan coat billowing in the cold wind, the streetlights catching the sharp lines of his face and the dark ink on his throat. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a reckoning. The automatic doors hissed open, admitting a rush of cold night air and the heavy, metallic scent of rain. Tae-seok walked in with a measured, predatory grace that made the linoleum floor feel like it was cracking under his weight. Behind him, four men in charcoal suits fanned out, their faces devoid of emotion. They didn't speak. They simply moved, a silent tide that pushed the few weary patients and the startled receptionist toward the back exits. Tae-seok's gaze ignored the chaos of his arrival, locking onto the small, trembling figure hunched in the corner. Shirley felt the air leave her lungs. She had expected a monster or perhaps the police, but the man standing before her was something else entirely. He was a vision of dark elegance, his tan coat contrasting with the sterile blue of the clinic. As he approached, the overhead lights hit the tattoo on his neck, a dark, intricate design that seemed to pulse with every step he took. He stopped 3 feet from her. He didn't tower over her to intimidate. He simply existed in her space with an overwhelming gravity. His eyes, dark and analytical, swept over her. He saw the way she cradled her arm, the angry yellow and purple blossoms of bruises on her neck, and the raw, hollow look in her eyes that spoke of a soul pushed to the precipice. "Shirley," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a deep, resonant velvet that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. I sent that by mistake," she whispered, her voice cracking. She waited for the reprimand, for the anger she was used to from Robert. She waited for him to tell her she was wasting his time. Instead, Tae-seok knelt. It was a slow, deliberate movement that brought him level with her. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her chin before gently tilting her face toward the light. His touch wasn't the frantic, grasping heat of Robert's hands. It was cool, steady, and strangely clinical. "He did this?" Tae-seok asked. Shirley nodded, a single tear escaping and carving a path through the grime on her cheek. He said he loved me." Tae-seok's expression didn't soften, but the air around him grew perceptibly colder. "Ownership is not love, Shirley. A man who breaks his prizes doesn't deserve to keep them." For the first time in years, the crushing weight of possession, the feeling of being a trophy Robert kept in a cage, flickered. In its place grew a terrifying, magnetic sense of protection. Tae-seok wasn't offering her a hug or a platitude. He was offering her the shadow of his wings. "Stand up," he commanded softly, extending a hand. "You're leaving this graveyard. From this moment on, anyone who seeks to touch you must first walk through me." The black sedan moved through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul like a silent blade, cutting through the neon fog. Inside, the leather was cool against Shirley's skin, smelling of expensive cedar and something metallic. Tae-seok sat beside her, a silhouette of absolute stillness. He didn't offer empty reassurances or touch her again. He simply occupied the space, a living wall between her and the world that had broken her. When the car ascended the private ramp of a shimmering glass monolith, Shirley felt a spike of vertigo. The penthouse was a cathedral of marble, shadow, and gold. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying view of a city that looked like a carpet of fallen stars. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly terrifying. "This is too much," Shirley whispered, her voice sounding small and ragged against the vastness of the foyer. She stood on the edge of a hand-woven silk rug, afraid to step forward. Her blue clinic top was stained, her bandages frayed at the edges. She felt like a smudge of dirt on a masterpiece. I don't belong in a place like this." Tae-seok paused at the edge of the room, shedding his tan coat to reveal the holster strapped to his ribs. "You belonged in a gutter according to the man who left you there," he said without turning around. "My home doesn't care about your pedigree, Shirley. It only cares about my will. And I have willed you to be here." He gestured to a silent maid waiting in the shadows. "Clean her, feed her, dress her in silk. If she trembles, give her wine. If she cries, let her." As Shirley was led away to a bathroom larger than her entire apartment, Tae-seok retreated to his study. He sat behind a desk of petrified wood and activated the wall of monitors. On the central screen, a high-definition feed showed Shirley standing alone in the center of the guest suite. He watched with clinical fascination as she touched the edge of a velvet chaise longue with a shaking finger, then jerked her hand back as if the fabric might burn her. She looked at her reflection in the gilded mirror and turned away, weeping silently into her palms. She was a study in trauma, a bird that had been kept in a cage so small it had forgotten how to stretch its wings. Most men would see her as a victim to be pitted. Tae-seok saw her as raw material. He watched the way her jaw tightened even as her shoulders shook, a tiny spark of defiance buried deep beneath the layers of Robert's psychological ash. He leaned back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in his dark, predatory eyes. He didn't want to just heal her. He wanted to see what kind of weapon she would become once the fear was purged and replaced with his brand of steel. The silence of the suite was broken by a sound that made Shirley's blood turn to ice. Her phone, resting on a marble nightstand, began to vibrate. The screen illuminated the darkened room, flashing a name that had once been her entire world. Robert. She stared at it, her breath hitching. Her hand reached out instinctively, a reflex born of 4 years of conditioned obedience. Even here, surrounded by Tae-seok's silk and steel, Robert's shadow reached for her. She answered on the third ring, her voice a ghost of a sound. "Hello, Shirley? Baby, thank God." Robert's voice was thick with a calculated, honeyed warmth. "I've been driving around for hours looking for you. The clinic said you left with some men. I'm so worried, Shirley. I didn't mean for things to go so far last night. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Come home and we'll fix this. I'll buy you those lilies you like." Shirley closed her eyes, the familiar pull of his gaslighting tugging at her heart. For a second, she almost believed him. Then, the line went quiet, and his voice dropped an octave, the honey curdling into venom. "But if you're playing games, Shirley, if you're with someone else, I swear to God, I will find you. And when I do, what I did last night will feel like a kiss. Do you hear me? Answer me." Before she could speak, a large, steady hand reached over her shoulder and took the phone. Tae-seok appeared like a phantom in the low light. He didn't look at the device as he pressed it to his ear. His eyes remained locked on Shirley, watching the way she flinched at the sound of Robert's rage. "She can hear you," Tae-seok said, his voice a calm, terrifying contrast to Robert's frantic shouting. "And so can I." The silence on the other end was instantaneous. "Who the hell is this?" Robert demanded, his bravado flickering. "That's my girlfriend. Put her on." "She is no longer a thing you own," Tae-seok replied. He began to pace the room, the movement slow and deliberate. "My name is Park Tae-seok. You might want to search for it. It will be the last thing you do with your freedom. Listen, buddy. I don't know who you think. I don't think, Robert. I execute." Tae-seok interrupted, his tone chillingly conversational. "You spoke of a slow fix. I prefer a slow demise. I'm going to dismantle your life piece by piece. Your reputation, your assets, and eventually your bones. I'm not coming for you today. I want you to sit in the dark and wonder when the ghost will arrive. Every shadow you see from now on, that's me." He ended the call and crushed the SIM card between 2 fingers. He looked at Shirley, who was trembling. "He can't reach you anymore," he said, handing her the broken remains of her past. "But you need to decide if you're going to keep crying for the man who broke you, or if you're ready to watch him burn." The days in the glass tower passed in a blur of soft fabrics and heavy silence. Shirley moved through the corridors like a specter, her footsteps muffled by deep pile carpets. Her voice reduced to a series of hesitant nods and whispered, "Thank yous." She was safe, yet she remained small, hunching her shoulders as if trying to occupy the least amount of space possible. Tae-seok observed this from the periphery of his empire. He found her in the library, staring at a wall of leather-bound books but not reaching for one. "Which one do you want?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. Shirley jumped, her hand fluttering to the bandages on her neck. "Oh, any of them. It doesn't matter. Whatever you think is best." Tae-seok walked toward her, his presence a dark, grounding force. He didn't look at the books, he looked at her. "That is the language of a victim, Shirley. Whatever you think is a white flag. It is the sound of a woman who has let someone else hold the pen to her life for too long. He stepped closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her heart stutter. Demand something. Anything. Tell me to leave. Tell me you hate the tea. Tell me you want the sun to move. I can't, she breathed, her eyes downcast. Robert always said my opinions were inconvenient. Tae-seok reached out, not to strike, but to lift her chin with a single finger, forcing her to meet his unyielding gaze. Robert is a coward who feared your strength. I am a man who requires it. If you are to stay in my world, you cannot be a shadow. Shadows are easily swallowed by the dark. He led her to a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sprawling chaos of Seoul. Look at the city. Thousands of people are screaming for a piece of it, and they get nothing because they ask for permission. In this room, there is no permission. There is only desire and the will to take it. He placed a heavy, obsidian paperweight on the edge of a glass table. Pick it up. Throw it. Break something that isn't you. Shirley stared at the object, her fingers trembling. The ghost of Robert's voice hissed in her ear, promising punishment for the slightest transgression. But Tae-seok's hand was a steady weight on her shoulder, an anchor in the storm of her anxiety. She reached out, her fingers closing around the cold stone. With a sudden, jagged cry that tore from the depths of her chest, she hurled it against the far wall. The sound of the impact was a thunderclap in the quiet room. She gasped, waiting for the blow, for the shouting. It never came. Tae-seok simply watched the scuff on the wood with a faint, predatory tilt of his head. Better, he murmured. Now, tell me what you want for dinner, and if you say whatever I want, I will make you sit in silence until you find a hunger of your own. The penthouse was a tomb of moonlight and shadows when the silence finally shattered. It wasn't a scream or a gunshot, but the rhythmic metallic snick of a suppressed pistol and the heavy thud of a body hitting the marble in the foyer. Shirley, standing in the kitchen for a glass of water, froze as the air in the room shifted. The scent of ozone and wet pavement drifted through the vents. Tae-seok emerged from the hallway, his shirt unbuttoned, his movements a blur of lethal instinct. He didn't look at her, but his voice reached her in a sharp, low hiss. The pantry, behind the reinforced steel. Go. Now. He pivoted toward the darkened lounge just as a figure materialized from the terrace. A shadow draped in tactical gear, moving with the precision of a professional. A flash of steel glinted in the moonlight. Tae-seok intercepted the assassin's strike, the sound of bone meeting bone echoing through the open floor plan. They crashed into a glass display case, shattering a priceless porcelain vase into 1,000 jagged teeth. Shirley retreated toward the pantry, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Hide, the old Shirley whispered. Be small. Be invisible. Wait for it to end. But through the gap in the kitchen island, she saw the reality of the struggle. Tae-seok was powerful, but he was fighting a man who had come prepared for a ghost. The assassin had managed to pin Tae-seok against the marble counter, a serrated blade inching toward the hollow of the chairman's tattooed throat. Tae-seok's eyes met hers across the distance. They weren't pleading. They were testing. He was holding the assassin's wrist with both hands, his muscles straining, his face a mask of cold, concentrated fury. On the counter beside Shirley lay a heavy, professional chef's knife she had used earlier. It caught the blue light of the city skyline, its edge a silver promise. Robert had told her she was a victim. Tae-seok had told her she was a weapon. She didn't think. She moved. The floor was cold under her bare feet as she sprinted across the kitchen. The terror was still there, but it was being incinerated by a new, white-hot heat. She didn't hide. She didn't scream. She gripped the handle of the knife with both hands, her knuckles white, and drove the blade into the assassin's unprotected shoulder with every ounce of her redirected rage. The man howled, his grip on Tae-seok faltering. That split second was all the ghost needed. Tae-seok twisted the assassin's arm until it snapped, then finished the work with a brutal, clinical efficiency that Shirley didn't look away from. When the body finally slumped to the floor, the silence returned, heavier than before. Shirley stood over the carnage, her hands shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood, dark and hot, had splattered across her white silk sleeve. Tae-seok stood up, smoothing his hair back as if he had merely finished a difficult meeting. He walked to her, ignoring the corpse, and placed a hand over hers, still gripped tight around the knife. "The first cut is the hardest," he murmured, his voice a dark caress. "After that, the world belongs to you." Shirley looked at the blood on her arm, then up at him. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt like a predator. The news arrived on a tablet screen, a polished image of Robert P. Jones looking somber in a charcoal suit, a black ribbon pinned to his lapel. The headline read, "Local philanthropist holds vigil for missing partner." He was playing the grieving martyr, using Shirley's disappearance to harvest sympathy from the city's elite at the annual Emerald Gala. Tae-seok tossed the tablet onto the desk, his lips curling into a thin, dangerous smile. "He's using your ghost to build a monument to his ego," he said, his voice echoing in the cold marble of the study. "He thinks you're a tragedy he can sell. He doesn't realize you're the storm coming to ruin his weather." Shirley stood by the window, her gaze fixed on her reflection. The bruises on her neck had faded to faint, yellowish shadows, but the woman staring back at her was unrecognizable. Her eyes were no longer wide with the frantic search for an exit. They were level, dark, and steady. She looked at the bloodstain on her white silk sleeve from the night before, a mark that hadn't been washed away, but preserved. "He'll be there," Shirley said, her voice lacking its former tremor. "Surrounded by cameras and his friends. He thinks he's safe in the light." "Safety is an illusion for men like him," Tae-seok replied, walking toward her. He stood behind her, his reflection looming over hers like a dark guardian. "We are going to crash his mourning period. I want him to see you. I want him to watch the woman he tried to break walk through the front door of his sanctuary on the arm of the man who is going to end him." "It's a trap," she whispered, though she didn't move away. "Of course it is," Tae-seok murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "But it isn't his trap. It's ours. He's invited the city to watch him weep. We're going to give them something else to talk about." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw where Robert had once struck her. "You will wear crimson, not because it's beautiful, but because it's the color of the blood you've shed and the blood he owes you. Tonight, Shirley, you stop being a victim and start being an event." She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, a cold fire that had replaced the paralyzing fear. Robert had spent years making her feel small, convincing her that the world would recoil from her brokenness. Tae-seok was doing the opposite. He was putting her on a pedestal and handing her a match. "I want him to see me," Shirley said, her fingers tightening into a fist. "I want to see the moment he realizes I'm not his anymore." "Then we go," Tae-seok said, his hands sliding down to grip hers, his ink-stained skin a stark contrast to her pale wrist. "Let's go show them what happens when a porcelain doll learns how to bite." The transformation was not merely a matter of fabric and thread, but a reclamation of skin. In the master suite of the glass tower, Shirley stood before the three-way mirror, draped in a gown the color of an open wound. The crimson silk clung to her frame like a second skin, the deep V of the back exposing the faint, fading marks of Robert's ownership, now nothing more than battle scars beneath a dusting of shimmering powder. Diamonds, cold and sharp as ice, circled her throat, hiding the last of the bandages. Tae-seok stepped into the frame behind her. He wore a tuxedo of midnight black, his neck tattoo a dark rebellion against the formal white collar. He didn't tell her she was beautiful. That was a word for fragile things. Instead, he placed a heavy, gloved hand on her shoulder and met her eyes in the glass. "They will look for the girl who went missing," he said, his voice a low vibration. "Give them the woman who took her place." The Emerald Gala was a sea of muted pastels and polite lies. When the grand doors of the ballroom swung open, the collective hum of the city's elite faltered. The rhythmic clicking of cameras spiked into a frenzied strobe light. Shirley didn't flinch. She kept her chin parallel to the marble floor, her hand resting light but firm on Tae-seok's arm. She felt the weight of 100 gazes. The same people who had whispered behind their fans about Robert's unstable girlfriend. The same socialites who had looked through her as if she were made of glass. Now they parted like a receding tide. At the center of the room stood Robert. He was holding a glass of champagne, his face twisted into a mask of practiced sorrow as he spoke to a local news crew. He looked up, the morning smile frozen on his lips. As his eyes traveled from the lethal, dark-eyed man at the lead to the woman in crimson, the glass in his hand began to tremble. Shirley felt a surge of cold, intoxicating power. She saw the flash of recognition in his eyes, followed immediately by a primitive, jagged fear. He looked for the Shirley he could silence with a glare. He found a queen standing next to a king of shadows. Tae-seok leaned down, his lips ghosting against her temple, though his eyes never left Robert's pale face. Look at him, Shirley. He isn't a god. He's a small man in a large room, terrified that the world is finally seeing him for what he is. Shirley smiled then. Not the hesitant, pleading smile of her past, but a sharp, predatory curve of her lips. She didn't look away. She didn't hide. She walked directly into the center of the light, the sound of her heels on the marble sounding like the first drumbeats of a war. The cold night air on the balcony was a sharp relief from the stifling perfume and hypocrisy of the ballroom. Shirley stood by the stone balustrade. The city of Seoul spread out beneath her like a map of possibilities. Behind her, the glass door creaked open. The scent reached her before his voice did. A mixture of expensive bourbon and the cloying, familiar sweat of a man losing his grip. Shirley. Robert's voice was a jagged whisper, stripped of its public polish. He stepped into the moonlight, his face contorted in a pathetic mixture of rage and relief. What have you done? Who is that animal you're with? You're having a breakdown, baby. I can see it. The trauma, it's made you lose your mind. Shirley didn't turn. She watched a plane blink across the horizon. I've never been more sane, Robert. Look at you, he hissed, stepping closer, his hand reaching out in that old, possessive arc, dressed up like a high-end whore. He's using you, Shirley, just like you think I was. But I'm the only one who knows how broken you really are. I'm the only one who can fix the mess you've become. Come back now, and I'll tell everyone you were kidnapped. I'll protect you from the police, from him, from yourself. The gaslighting was a familiar rhythm, a lullaby designed to put her spirit to sleep. For a heartbeat, the old habit of apology flickered in her chest, the urge to say I'm sorry for being hurt. Then a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the stone archway. Tae-seok stepped forward, his presence instantly draining the heat from Robert's words. He didn't look at Robert, he looked only at Shirley. Without a word, he reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo and placed two objects on the wide stone railing between them. On the left, an envelope, a first-class plane ticket to Zurich, a new identity, and enough offshore credits to ensure she would never have to look over her shoulder again. Clean exit, a return to the light. On the right, a sleek, matte black pistol, its weight pulling at the silk of the evening. It was silent, cold, and final. The exit or the ending, Tae-seok said, his voice as calm as the grave. One leads to a life where you forget his name. The other leads to a life where you take mine. Both require you to stop being a victim. Choose, Shirley. I won't do this for you. Robert's eyes widened, his face draining of color as he looked at the weapon. Shirley, don't be stupid. You can't. You're not a killer. You're my Shirley. You're soft. You're nothing without me. Shirley looked at the ticket, then at the man who had spent years convincing her she was a ghost. Finally, she looked at the gun. Her hand didn't tremble as she reached out. Shirley's fingers brushed the cold steel of the pistol, then drifted to the paper of the envelope. Robert let out a shaky, triumphant breath, already reaching for her. That's my girl. Take the ticket. Go away and be quiet. It's better this way. But Shirley didn't pick up the envelope. She pushed both objects aside with a slow, deliberate motion. You're right about one thing, Robert, Shirley said, her voice echoing with a terrifying clarity. I'm not a killer. Not yet. Because death is a mercy you haven't earned. She reached into the small, beaded clutch at her waist and pulled out her own phone, the one Tae-seok had helped her upgrade. With a single tap, the giant LED screens flanking the gala ballroom behind them flickered. Robert's triumphant smile died as his own voice filled the night air. Not the voice of a grieving martyr, but the recording of his call from 2 nights ago. The honeyed lies, followed by the jagged threats, the admissions of his accidental violence, and the vile promises of what he would do when he found her. Below them, the gala fell into a tomb-like silence as the elite of Seoul watched the mask of their favorite philanthropist shatter in high definition. Financial records, the ones Tae-seok's hackers had unearthed from Robert's hidden accounts, scrolled across the screens, detailing years of embezzlement and social sabotage. Robert's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. "Shirley, stop this. Turn it off. It's already gone to the prosecutors, the press, and your board of directors," she said, stepping into his space, forcing him to retreat until his back hit the stone railing. "You spent years making me invisible, Robert. I thought I'd return the favor. By tomorrow morning, you won't exist. No assets. No reputación. No friends." She turned her back on him, the crimson silk of her gown swirling like a flame. She walked toward Tae-seok, who was watching her with a dark, prideful intensity. "I'm done with him," she whispered. Tae-seok nodded once, a silent signal to the shadows behind him. As he led Shirley away, 2 of his men stepped toward the trembling Robert. The physical work would be quiet, thorough, and far away from the cameras. They ascended to the highest point of the glass tower, standing on the observation deck where the wind whipped at Shirley's hair. The city of Seoul lay beneath them, a sprawling kingdom of light and shadow. Shirley felt the weight of the diamonds at her throat, but they no longer felt like a collar. Tae-seok stood beside her, his hand finding the small of her back. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew the woman who had walked onto that balcony was dead, replaced by someone who finally understood the price of power. "The world looks different from up here, doesn't it?" he asked. Shirley leaned into him, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun would eventually rise on a world she no longer feared. "It looks like a chessboard," she replied. Tae-seok's grip tightened, a silent promise of the rain to come. "Then let's make our move. Here are some lessons to learn from the story." The transformation of Shirley J. Williams offers a chilling yet empowering exploration of agency, worth, and the nature of protection. The primary moral is that victimhood is a cage constructed by others, but silence is the lock. Shirley's journey demonstrates that survivors of narcissistic abuse often internalize the smallness demanded by their predators. Her liberation begins the moment she externalizes her pain, first through a mistaken text, and finally by reclaiming her voice to dismantle Robert's reputation. It suggests that true healing isn't just about finding safety. It's about reclaiming the right to occupy space and exert power. Furthermore, the story presents a provocative take on moral ambiguity. Shirley moves from a predator, Robert, who uses gaslighting to destroy her, to a monster, Tae-seok, who uses truth and strength to arm her. The lesson here is that protection should never be synonymous with possession. While Tae-seok is dangerous, he offers Shirley the one thing Robert never did: choice. Whether she chooses the light or the dark, the moral victory lies in her transition from a pawn to a player on the chessboard of her own life.